Good evening, generals. Tonight's episode of Men Around the Führer is wild. I hope you enjoy it. So, the air in Darmstadt, in the Hessian region of the German Empire, shimmered with the promise of a new century when Karl Friedrich Otto Wolff was born on May 13, 1900. His beginnings were secure. He was the son of a wealthy businessman who also served as a minor local court judge. Young Karl, known for his piercing blue eyes and tight blonde hair, received a strong education and carried the ambitions expected of his affluent upbringing. His path to adulthood was violently interrupted by the Great War. In 1917, having completed his schooling, he promptly volunteered for the Imperial Army, joining the Officer Cadet Corps of the Guard Infantry Regiment, serving bravely on the Western Front. He achieved the rank of lieutenant and was decorated with both the Iron Cross Second Class and First Class. But the heroism of the war's end brought only disappointment. The terms of the Treaty of Versailles dictated a drastic reduction of the German armed forces, scuttling any hope Wolff held of continuing his military career. Between 1918 and 1920, he spent time in the paramilitary Free Corps. Forced into civilian life, Wolff, who longed for the patriotic military setting he had lost, turned to the prosaic world of finance and business. He apprenticed at Bethmann Bank in Frankfurt and later worked for Deutsche Bank in Munich. He studied law and political economics, though he never managed to obtain the requisite state examination diplomas. He married Frieda von Rumheld in 1923 after being laid off from the bank, started his own public relations firm in Munich, running it until 1933. Wolff possessed the appearance of an active officer, perfect manners, and an undeniable charisma, but he struggled with the creeping chaos and economic instability of the Weimar Republic. Like many of his generation, he sought a new direction, a saving message, and an environment where he could exploit his talents. He found his calling in the burgeoning nationalist movement. In the autumn of 1931, Wolff joined the Nazi Party and the SS, the elite guard of German fascism, though initially he was merely one of hundreds of thousands of new members. Yet his pedigree, his military background, and his business acumen quickly made him stand out. He joined the SS with the commitment to support Adolf Hitler's ideas and conscientiously carry out the orders of the Reich SS leader. He became chief adjutant to Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, in 1934. Wolff's trajectory within the Nazi power structure was meteoric. He was promoted to the influential position of chief of Himmler's personal staff in 1936. This was a role perfectly suited to his ambitions and skills, turning him into a central coordinating force within the Black Corps. His office expanded rapidly, circumventing other central departments, enabling Wolff to become a sort of SS post office, routing and rerouting inquiries, suggestions, complaints, and gossip. Wolff was a shrewd operator, more flexible and clever than his predecessors, and succeeded in gaining Himmler's full confidence. The SS leader grew deeply attached, affectionately calling him Wolffie or Dear Wolffchen. He accompanied Himmler on trips and participated in leadership responsibilities. Though he wore a heavily decorated uniform, Wolff was primarily an administrator, a calculating figure who avoided the public limelight sought by other high-ranking officials, acting instead through conversations, orders, and written materials. He often presented himself as the friend of all, diligently helping Himmler carry out various eccentric ideas and fantastic schemes. His involvement with the SS was deeply ambitious and ideological. He saw the SS as an order of knights and a racial elite, believing himself to be the prototype of Nordic German aristocracy. He carefully nurtured his image, building an ancestral home on Lake Tegern, which he proclaimed was necessary for his family. Despite his low official salary, which was the norm for party members, he commissioned an expensive 10-room house with a boathouse and bathhouse. When the construction cost ballooned far beyond his initial budget of 40,000 marks to over 154,000 marks, a conflict arose with the party court, which criticized him for using his position for personal advantage. Himmler vehemently defended his Wolffie, protesting the court's reprimand in a pompous letter designated as a secret Reich matter. Wolff also became deeply involved in Himmler's esoteric ventures, such as the Society for the Promotion and Cultivation of German Cultural Memorials, headquartered in Munich, which was focused on reconstructing the Wewelsburg Castle as an SS shrine. Wolff was responsible for personnel decisions, planning, and development of training for this grandiose project, which was expected to cost 250 million marks and take 20 years to complete. The construction of the castle was carried out by prisoners from a nearby concentration camp, over 1,200 of whom died there. Wolff, however, always favored a strict division of responsibilities, ensuring that he held none for the concentration camps, which fell under the supervision of his old friend, Gruppenführer Oswald Pohl, making it difficult for Wolff to find out about conditions behind the barbed wire fences. Wolff's administrative role placed him directly at the intersection of high power and institutional criminality. He claimed a key role in the preparations for the bloody purge of the SA leadership in 1934, known as the Night of the Long Knives, though he vaguely characterized his involvement as merely being an assistant. He recalled handling over 7,000 telephone calls in 72 hours, and later asserted that his loyalty to the Führer during this event earned him elevated trust. He also spent considerable effort managing the constant feuding between Himmler and other prominent Nazi leaders, often acting as a middleman or passing along sensitive information to the appropriate collector of indiscretions, such as Hermann Göring and Martin Bormann, to further his and Himmler's careers. In 1939, with the war looming, Wolff became the principal liaison officer between Himmler and Adolf Hitler, securing one of the regime's most sensitive posts. This position positioned him as Himmler's eyes and ears at the Führer's headquarters, requiring him to pass through extensive security every day to reach the inner sanctum. In this role, Wolff became privy to top-level discussions concerning policies and practices of the notorious SS. Despite his later protests that he was an innocent administrator who operated only on a need-to-know basis and focused on ceremonial matters, the documentary record reveals his deep entanglement in the gravest crimes of the regime. Evidence shows that in September 1939, shortly after the invasion of Poland, Wolff wrote to the police ordering the immediate arrest of all male Jews of Polish nationality and their family members, and the confiscation of their wealth. He was also present at mass murder operations. Erich von dem Bach-Zelewski testified that in August 1941, Himmler and Wolff attended the shooting of Jews at Minsk, which had been organized by a mobile killing unit. Bach-Zelewski noted that Himmler was very pale during the executions and felt sick, leading the SS leader to seek alternative killing methods. Wolff claimed to have told Himmler, "You could have spared yourself and me this," and warned his superior that the unnecessary order undermined their long-standing friendship to the point of tearing it to shreds. The subsequent bureaucratization of murder led to the notorious Wannsee Conference in January 1942. Wolff was undeniably instrumental in the administrative and logistical facilitation of the mass extermination of the Jews. He was administratively involved in the vast deportation transports during the murder of Jews, including the organized movement of people from the Warsaw Ghetto in 1942. The most damning documentary proof of his complicity came from an exchange of letters with Reich Railway Director Albert Ganzenmüller concerning the necessary rolling stock for these transports. In a letter dated August 13, 1942, written from the Führer's headquarters, Wolff thanked Ganzenmüller, stating, "I note with particular pleasure from your communication that a train with 5,000 members of the chosen people has been running daily for 14 days, and that we are accordingly in a position to continue with this population movement at an accelerated pace." Wolff also assured that he had been in contact with the officers concerned so that a smooth implementation of all measures is guaranteed. The term chosen people was identified by prosecutors as part of the specialized Nazi vocabulary used to describe Jews. When confronted with this document, Wolff offered desperate excuses. He claimed he only made the necessary telephone calls for the train organization on Himmler's orders. He insisted that he believed the Jewish people were only being moved to a sort of reservation similar to American Indians so that the number of guards could be reduced. He claimed he signed the letter merely as routine duty and denied seeing anything criminal in the act. Furthermore, he argued that he meant no harm because he sent the letter without the secret code required for Jewish matters. However, internal SS communication during this time clearly showed that the liquidation by operational units was a known component of the plans for clearing out populations. Wolff's complicity extended tragically into Nazi medical experiments conducted in concentration camps. His position as Himmler's head of staff meant that he was essential to the internal administration that planned, initiated, and authorized these crimes. Without administrators like Wolff, these experiments could never have taken place. Wolff's defensive strategy centered entirely on 2 points. First, insisting that the experiments he knew about were voluntary and thus not criminal, and second, denying the necessary criminal intent, or mens rea, arguing that he acted innocently in the course of his official routine duties. Wolff adamantly insisted that his knowledge was limited to only one demonstration of low-pressure experiments conducted by Dr. Rasche at Dachau concentration camp. He provided a highly detailed, yet self-serving account of this specific visit, claiming to have personally witnessed the demonstration. He described 10 prisoners who appeared at ease and willingly entered a low-pressure chamber, recovering quickly thereafter. These men, he claimed, were individuals sentenced in accordance with the law, not political prisoners. He testified that they asserted solemnly with Himmler that they voluntarily wished to make a modest contribution to the German war effort after their requests for active service were refused. Himmler, purportedly present at the viewing, promised to use his influence to secure their release from imprisonment and employment in active service. Wolff insisted, "I remember from any other source that low-pressure experiments on prisoners took place on a non-voluntary basis." This assertion was met with skepticism at the Nuremberg trials, where a prosecutor challenged the credibility of anyone claiming that subjects would voluntarily report for experiments that resulted in death or grave injury. The prosecutor stated, "I have never heard of anyone, including a thoroughbred idiot, who would report for his own death on a voluntary basis." Wolff doubled down, insisting he believed only what he saw with his own eyes during that brief, controlled demonstration. He emphasized that his experience was confined to the comparatively safe, low-pressure experiments at Dachau and were distinct from the frequently fatal freezing experiments conducted later at Auschwitz and Lublin concentration camps. He attributed the expansion of these fatal activities entirely to Himmler and the now-deceased Dr. Rasche, whom he painted as an unscrupulous force. However, the documentation contradicted his defense. Himmler's own correspondence demonstrated Wolff's involvement in facilitating the continued research. In a letter from Himmler to Air Force Field Marshal Milch, in November 1942, concerning the continuation of the experiments, Himmler clearly told Milch that while Wolff was involved in facilitating a number of the administrative arrangements, the experiments were his personal project. Himmler noted that "I personally assumed the responsibility for supplying asocial individuals and criminals who deserve only to die from concentration camps for these experiments." Himmler stressed that "these experiments should not be stopped. We owe that to our men," and asked Milch to assign Dr. Rasche to the SS so he could continue the experiments under Himmler's direct responsibility. Wolff also received correspondence directly regarding these activities. For instance, on May 20, 1942, Milch wrote to Wolff, addressing him as "Dear Wolffie," concerning the finished altitude experiments and the start of new low-temperature experiments for perils at high seas. Milch conveyed the special thanks from the Supreme Commander of the Air Corps to the SS for their extensive cooperation. These exchanges and later court findings clearly indicated that Wolff, who was the chief of the personal staff, was proactive in facilitating and extending the duration of these experiments on Himmler's behalf. Wolff explained away his signature on later documentation by claiming he signed only in the best of faith and on the instructions of the Reichsführer SS and in the course of my official duties. The turning point in Wolff's SS career came in 1943, following a significant personal dispute with Himmler. Wolff had sought permission to divorce his first wife and marry Ingeborg Gräfin von Bernstorff, with whom he had already fathered a child. Himmler refused the request, believing SS leadership should avoid such scandals. Wolff then went behind Himmler's back, successfully petitioning Hitler directly for permission to remarry, which infuriated the SS leader. This estrangement, coupled with a serious illness involving a kidney stone operation in early 1943, led to his removal from the central Berlin office. In July 1943, Wolff was transferred to Italy and appointed the highest police and SS leader in Nazi-occupied northern Italy, a role that, while senior, effectively removed him from Himmler's Berlin-based personal staff activities. His duties included suppressing partisan activity. After the attempted assassination of Hitler, on July 20, 1944, Wolff replaced Lieutenant General Rudolf Toussaint as Plenipotentiary General of the Armed Forces for Italy, giving him command of the entire rear army and making him the central German military figure in the Mediterranean theater. He was responsible for security, maintenance of prisons, supervision of concentration and forced labor camps, as well as the deportation of forced laborers. It was during this time that the ultimate ethical dilemma of his career arose, which he would leverage for the rest of his life. Wolff later claimed that in September 1943, Hitler had given him a special mission to occupy Vatican City, secure its files and art treasures, and take the Pope and the Curia to the north, fearing the pontiff would fall into Allied hands. Wolff asserted that he deliberately sought delays, citing the need for translators well-versed in Latin and Greek, and the complexity of moving additional SS and police units to avoid carrying out the crime. When setting the minimum timeline at 6 weeks, Hitler was purportedly disappointed but agreed, saying, "If one wants a first-class job, it cannot happen overnight." Wolff, the calculating general, understood that sabotaging the mission could win the gratitude of Pope Pius XII, providing him with leverage should Germany lose the war. His subsequent actions in Rome reflected this delicate political strategy. Along with other German diplomats like Ambassador Rudolf Rahn, Wolff worked to ensure that anti-Jewish measures did not provoke the Pope into condemning the Nazis publicly, which might trigger Hitler's dormant kidnap plot. When Himmler ordered a roundup of the Roman Jews, Wolff was unavailable to Consul Mühlhausen, having traveled to report to Hitler. However, Wolff appears to have used his influence to limit the operation, ensuring that only about 1,000 of the 8,000 Jews in Rome were seized initially. He had enough men to grab enough Jews to satisfy the Führer's bloodlust, but not enough to impel the Pope to speak out against the deadly operation. Wolff continued this preemptive moral angling after the Allies' initial successes in Italy. He personally met with Pope Pius XII in May 1944. The Pope, grateful for Wolff's perceived protection of Rome and the Vatican's treasures, granted him a private audience. Wolff later insisted, using his famous verbatim recall, that the Pope said, "How much misfortune could have been avoided had God led you to me earlier." Wolff would promote this narrative for decades after the war, portraying himself as a savior rather than an accomplice. As the war turned disastrously against Germany, Wolff began exploring a path to personal survival and national redemption. He recognized the futility of continued fighting and opposed Hitler's plan for a German redoubt in the Alps, which he viewed as madness that would cause unnecessary suffering and destruction. Wolff initiated secret negotiations, codenamed Operation Sunrise, with Alan W. Dulles, the regional head of U.S. intelligence in Switzerland, in violation of Allied agreements. Their first exploratory meeting took place in Zurich on March 8, 1945. Wolff, gambling his life, presented himself as a patriotic German seeking to end the war, willing to betray his government and act independently of Himmler. He offered to secure the surrender of German forces in Italy, end anti-partisan warfare, provide military maps, and release prisoners, including Jews and Allied prisoners of war. To prove his seriousness, he quickly secured the release of two leaders of the Italian resistance movement, Ferruccio Parri and Antonio Usmiani, who were in SS custody. Dulles was profoundly impressed by Wolff's demeanor, calling him extremely good-looking and trusting him enough to believe Wolff was acting sincerely to avoid unnecessary destruction. Wolff assured the Allies, "Gentlemen, if you can be patient, I will hand you Italy on a silver platter." The negotiations created a major political headache for the Allies. Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov vehemently protested the talks, accusing the Anglo-Americans of violating their agreement that all surrender negotiations must include the Soviet Union. This led to a brief diplomatic standoff, forcing the US to insist to Stalin that no negotiations for surrender have been entered into, and if there should be any negotiations, they will be conducted at Caserta with your representatives present throughout. Dulles was ordered to break off contact, but he continued to allow Swiss intelligence contacts to gather information on Wolff. Wolff utilized this period to gain military support for the surrender among his commanders, arguing that he had Hitler's instruction to pursue contact with Dulles. The negotiations culminated with Wolff's surrender of all German forces in Italy, signed on April 29, 1945, at Caserta and effective May 2, 1945. This was days before the official end of the war in Europe, and US officials credited the success of Operation Sunrise with bringing the war to a successful conclusion much earlier than would have otherwise been possible, with the consequent saving of many lives and much treasure. Wolff was arrested on May 13, 1945, his 45th birthday in Bozen. However, instead of facing the gallows like many senior SS leaders, he was initially treated with surprising leniency. This outcome stemmed directly from Operation Sunrise. Wolff's path to immunity was paved by intervention from US intelligence circles, particularly Allen Dulles and the former Sunrise negotiators. These officials feared that Wolff's public testimony might expose the highly sensitive anti-Soviet maneuverings of the surrender talks, which had been conducted in violation of Allied agreements. Dulles worked diligently to paint Wolff as a good SS man, though he initially told Wolff's advocates to let time pass by this man. Wolff himself complicated matters by boasting to fellow prisoners that the Americans were keeping all their promises to him due to the surrender negotiations. Wolff was transferred to Nuremberg not as a defendant, but as an important prosecution witness. The Allies faced a dilemma: hold a public trial, risking exposure of the anti-Soviet politics of the surrender, or find a way to shield him. In the spring of 1946, Wolff suddenly exhibited symptoms of a nervous disorder. It is not entirely clear if this was genuine or a tactical move by Dulles. Regardless, he was transferred from the Palace of Justice to a psychiatric facility in Augsburg, effectively shielding him from further prosecution. Dulles recommended to the British that Wolff be paroled and not turned over for trial by any other power, arguing that Wolff's activities were sufficiently independent and risky and sufficiently valuable to us in material and lives to warrant intervention. This line became official American policy. Though he survived the International Military Tribunal, Wolff was not entirely free. He was indicted by the post-war German government for denazification. In 1948, the German court, influenced by favorable affidavits from US figures like General Lemnitzer, who stated Wolff's actions in the negotiations should be held to compensate for any past misdeeds, sentenced Wolff to 5 years in prison for his membership in the criminal SS organization. The British Legal Division also submitted a recommendation that Wolff was innocent of the charges because he hadn't been made aware of them and lacked the authority to prevent them. The sentence was ultimately reduced, and he was released in June 1949. His confinement time counted as served. Wolff had secured a classification as a casual participant in the war in the post-war German system. Following his release, Wolff settled in Bavaria and returned to civilian life. He resumed a career in advertising, a move facilitated by his old contacts from Himmler's circle of friends. He was highly successful, earning a substantial income as a general representative for a major weekly magazine. He bought a small manor on the waterfront of Lake Starnberg, ensuring his second family enjoyed the affluent lifestyle he aspired to. In 1953, he was even allowed to enter Switzerland to visit his former negotiating partners, a return to normalized status. His peaceful existence was shattered a decade later. In 1962, Wolff was arrested again in West Germany. The charge was complicity in the mass murder of 300,000 Polish Jews, stemming directly from the damning railway transport letter concerning the trains to Treblinka presented years earlier at the Nuremberg trials. The trial in Munich in 1964 forced Wolff to face accountability for his administrative role in the Holocaust. Wolff continued his defense strategy, claiming he was an anti-Bolshevik idealist, not a criminal, and that all atrocities occurred behind his back. He claimed he found out about the mass murders only a few weeks before the war's end. When confronted with the Ganzenmüller letter, he again argued that he can actually not find anything criminal in transporting Jews. On September 30, 1964, Wolff was found guilty as an accessory to the murder of 300,000 people and sentenced to 15 years in prison. The maximum sentence would have been life imprisonment, but as an accessory to the actual crime, a lesser sentence was applied. Wolff was initially imprisoned in Stadelheim and later moved to Straubing. He immediately began efforts to overturn his sentence, expending a vast amount of money he had made in the post-war period on lawyers' fees. Due to health issues, he began receiving periodic releases for medical treatment starting in 1969. He was permanently released following a heart attack in 1971. In the 1970s and early 1980s, the released Wolff returned to public life, lecturing frequently and appearing in television documentaries. He continued to promote the story that he had protected Pope Pius XII from Hitler, seeking to portray himself as a savior rather than an accomplice. He was even called to the bishop's office in 1972 to give a statement regarding everything he knew about the Holy Father, as the Vatican was collecting information for the Pope's potential beatification. In a final bizarre twist, Wolff converted to Islam late in life. In the late 1970s, Wolff's controversial later life intersected with another scandal when he became involved with journalist Gerd Heidemann, traveling through South America with him. Wolff served as a consultant for the infamous alleged Hitler diaries, which turned out to be forgeries. Wolff, in poor health and in his mid-80s by then, appeared genuinely unaware they were fake. He believed that the forged diaries confirmed his long-held assertion that Hitler had not ordered the extermination of the Jews. Karl Friedrich Otto Wolff died on July 16, 1984, in a hospital in Rosenheim, Bavaria. Wolff embodied one of the strangest careers among the senior Nazi leadership. He was, as described by critics, an administrative facilitator who, without firing a shot, contributed indispensably to war crimes and genocide. His exceptional appearance and diplomatic skills were matched by his immense ambition, allowing him to ascend to the highest ranks. His case remains a testament to the fact that his cooperation with U.S. intelligence in Operation Sunrise and his successful construction to it of a defense narrative, often involving the denial of criminal intent, mens rea, and reliance on unproven heroic acts, allowed him to evade the full legal accountability demanded by justice. As one contemporary observer summarized, Wolff seemed to have developed the ability to shake off an era of crime like a raindrop sliding down oilskin.